It is the morning of the 8th of October, 1918, in a cold, wet, fog-choked forest in France called the Argonne, and a patrol of 17 American soldiers has just walked into a catastrophe. They had slipped behind the German lines, trying to get around and silence a nest of machine guns that was tearing their battalion apart. For a moment it worked. They surprised a group of Germans and took prisoners, and then the machine guns on the hill turned around. In a single burst of fire, the German guns cut down 9 of the 17 Americans. The patrol's sergeants are dead or wounded. Most of the survivors are pinned flat to the ground, unable to lift their heads, trapped behind the prisoners they had just taken, in a little hollow in the forest, with dozens of machine guns raking the position from the slope above. It is, by every reasonable measure, the end. The patrol has been shattered, its leaders are down, and the fire is so heavy that to move is to die. And out of that pinned-down handful, one man does something that should not have been possible. He is a corporal, a lanky, red-haired backwoodsman from the mountains of Tennessee, and he is at that moment the senior man still standing on his feet. He is also, and this is the part that matters, a man who did not want to be in this war at all. He is a devout, deeply religious man from a tiny mountain community, and only a couple of years earlier he had tried to get out of military service entirely, on the grounds that his faith forbade him to kill. He had filed to be excused as a conscientious objector. He believed with his whole heart that taking a human life was a sin, and now he is lying in a forest in France with German machine guns killing the men around him, and he is about to do something that will end with 132 enemy soldiers marching out of that forest as his prisoners, captured very largely by him alone. His name is Alvin York, and how a mountain pacifist who tried to avoid the war became the man who single-handedly silenced a hillside of machine guns and captured an entire enemy detachment is one of the strangest and most human stories in the history of American arms. If you are new here, stick around, because this is a story about a man at war with himself long before he was ever at war with anyone else, about faith and doubt, and what a person does when the thing he believes is a sin becomes the only thing standing between his friends and death. But to understand that morning in the Argonne, you first have to understand where Alvin York came from and the crisis of conscience he had to fight his way through before he ever fired a shot. Alvin Cullum York was born in 1887 in the mountains of Tennessee, in a place so remote and so poor that it is hard for most people to imagine now. He was one of 11 children, raised in a tiny cabin in a hardscrabble community of subsistence farmers and hunters. Formal schooling was almost non-existent. He had only a few years of it, snatched between the endless work of a mountain farm. What he did have, from boyhood, was a rifle in his hands. In that world, hunting was not a hobby, it was food. And Alvin York became a superb marksman, the kind of shot that mountain communities produced almost as a matter of course, a man who could hit what he aimed at, quickly and without wasted motion, because a missed shot meant a missed meal. Hold on to that, because it will matter enormously. As a young man, York was, by his own frank account, something of a hellraiser. He drank hard, brawled, and ran wild in the rough backcountry taverns along the Kentucky border. But then, a couple of years before the war, he underwent a profound religious conversion. He joined a small, strict church, gave up the drinking and the fighting entirely, and became a devout, sober, serious man of faith. And the faith he embraced took the commandment against killing with total literalness. His church taught that violence was wrong, that war was wrong, that to take a human life was to break one of God's direct commandments. Alvin York believed it completely. He had gone from a wild young brawler to a gentle, God-fearing pacifist, and he meant it. And then, in 1917, the United States entered the First World War, and the draft came even to the mountains of Tennessee, and Alvin York received a notice ordering him to register for military service. He did not want to go, and what he did next is important because it shows you the kind of man he was, not a coward, but a man in genuine anguish. York applied to be excused from combat as a conscientious objector, citing his religious beliefs against killing. His claim was denied. He appealed. It was denied again. The authorities did not accept that his small mountain church qualified him for the exemption. And so Alvin York was drafted and put into uniform and sent to training, all the while wrestling with a crisis that tore at him. He was a man who believed with his whole soul that killing was a sin, and his country was training him to kill. This is the heart of the man, and it is why his story is so different from an ordinary tale of heroism. York did not resolve his crisis by simply deciding his faith was wrong or by numbing himself to it. He agonized over it. In the army, he talked at length and in real distress with his officers, men who, to their great credit, did not simply order him to shut up and soldier, but engaged with him seriously. They talked with him about the Bible, about the places in Scripture where God's people go to war, about the idea of a righteous cause, about whether a man might sometimes have to fight to protect the innocent and to end a greater evil. York went home on leave and went up into the mountains alone to pray and to think it through, wrestling with it the way a man wrestles with the most important question of his life. And he came back down having reached, somehow, a peace with it, a conviction that he could serve, that he could fight in this cause, and that in doing so, he was not defying God, but doing his will. It was not a glib conversion. It was a hard-won, deeply considered resolution of the deepest conflict in his soul. He had made peace between his faith and his duty. But he was still, at his core, a man who did not want to kill, and who would only do it if he became convinced it was right. It is worth pausing on how rare and how honest that whole process was, because it is the thing that separates York from almost every other war hero you will ever hear about. He did not swagger into the war. He did not decide his faith was inconvenient and set it aside. He did not simply obey because he was told to. He took the deepest conviction of his life, that killing was a sin, and he refused to abandon it lightly, and he also refused to hide behind it in bad faith. He forced himself to actually think it through, all the way down, at the risk of his own soul as he understood it. He read his Bible looking not for an easy answer, but for the true one. He talked it over, honestly and at length, with officers who could have simply barked orders at him, and instead treated his anguish with respect. He went up onto his own mountain, alone, and prayed until he had an answer he could live with. Whatever you believe about the conclusion he reached, the integrity of how he reached it is undeniable. Most people never examine their deepest convictions that seriously about anything. York examined his under the most extreme pressure imaginable, the pressure of a world war and the possibility of prison. And he came out the other side, not with a convenient rationalization, but with a genuine, hard-earned peace. He decided that fighting to protect the innocent and to end a great evil could be, for him, an act of obedience to God rather than a betrayal of him. He walked into the Argonne as a man who had settled accounts with his own conscience. That is why he could do what he did without being destroyed by it. That was the man who found himself in the Argonne forest in October of 1918. The battle was the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the enormous American push in the final weeks of the war, and it was some of the most brutal fighting American troops had ever seen. To understand the desperation of that morning, you have to understand the offensive it was part of. The Meuse-Argonne was the largest operation the American Army had ever mounted up to that point in its history. Well over 1 million American soldiers committed to a grinding, weeks-long battle intended to break the German lines and end the war. It was fought over some of the worst terrain on the Western Front. The Argonne itself was a dark, dense, hilly forest, cut by ravines and streams, choked with undergrowth, and the Germans had spent years fortifying it into a deep belt of trenches, barbed wire, and concealed. Machine gun nests sighted to cover every approach. Attacking through it was a nightmare. Visibility was short. The ground channeled advancing troops into prearranged killing zones, and the German machine gunners, dug into camouflage positions, could rake the American infantry from angles they often could not even locate. Casualties were horrific. The offensive would end up being one of the bloodiest single operations in all of American military history, costing tens of thousands of American lives before it was done. This was not a clean, sweeping advance. It was a slow, murderous slog through a forest full of hidden guns, and every yard was paid for. That is the meat grinder Alvin York's battalion was fed into on the morning of the 8th of October. The Argonne was a dense, tangled, hilly forest, and the Germans had turned it into a fortress of machine gun nests and trenches and wire. On the morning of the 8th of October, York's battalion was advancing across a valley and getting slaughtered. A cluster of German machine guns on a ridge was pouring fire down onto the American advance, pinning it down, cutting men to pieces. The attack could not move. Something had to be done about those guns. So a small group was sent to deal with them, a patrol of 17 men, including York, ordered to work their way around to the flank, slip behind the German position, and take out the machine guns from the rear. They moved off through the woods, worked their way around and behind the enemy line, and for a moment they had extraordinary success. They stumbled onto a group of German soldiers well behind the front, including, by the accounts, a German officer and a number of men, some of them at a headquarters area behind the guns. The Americans surprised them and took a large group of them prisoner, almost without a fight. And then it went wrong. The German machine gunners up on the ridge realized what had happened behind them, and they swung their guns around and opened fire on the little patrol, firing down onto their own captured comrades and the Americans guarding them all together. That first burst was devastating. 9 of the 17 Americans went down, killed or wounded. The men who had been leading the patrol were among the casualties, and the survivors were pinned, flattened against the wet ground, unable to raise their heads, trapped in a small hollow while machine guns hammered them from the slope above. In an instant, Alvin York was the senior unwounded man, and he found himself in a position of almost total hopelessness. A handful of surviving Americans pinned down, a crowd of German prisoners on their hands, and a whole hillside of machine guns firing on them from close range. Most men in that spot would have died there, or surrendered, or huddled and hoped. What York did instead is the thing they still teach. He got into a position where he could see the machine guns, and he began, methodically, to shoot the gunners. Remember the boyhood on the mountain, the rifle that meant the difference between eating and going hungry, the marksmanship bred into him by necessity. All of that came to bear now. York was a superb rifle shot, calm under pressure in a way that is almost impossible to comprehend, and he set to work with a cold, precise skill. From his position, he picked off the German machine gunners one at a time. Every time a gunner showed himself, York shot him. He did not panic. He did not spray. He aimed and fired and hit and moved to the next with the same economy of motion he had used hunting in the Tennessee hills, except that now the targets were men on a hillside trying to kill him and his friends. There is something almost eerie in the accounts of how calm he was. All around him was chaos. Men dead and dying, machine guns hammering, bullets tearing through the brush, the surviving Americans pinned and helpless. And in the middle of it was this one lanky Tennessean, working with the unhurried steadiness of a man at a shooting match, doing the one thing he had done all his life better than almost anyone alive. The machine guns could not get him, and this is a detail worth understanding. A machine gun is a fearsome weapon, but it depends on the gunner being able to see and stay on his target. And every time a German gunner rose or shifted to bring his weapon to bear on York, he exposed himself for an instant, and an instant was all York needed. So the very act of trying to kill him got the gunners killed. One after another, the guns on that slope fell silent as the men serving them dropped. It was a duel that should have been absurdly lopsided in the Germans' favor. Dozens of machine guns against one man with a rifle. And instead, because that one man was Alvin York, it went the other way. The mountain had made a marksman, and the marksman was now taking apart an entire fortified position by himself, shot by patient shot. The Germans, unable to stop this single deadly rifleman with their machine guns, tried to rush him. A group of German soldiers fixed bayonets and charged him directly, coming at him from the side to overrun his position. And here, another piece of the mountain marksman's skill came out, in a detail that has become famous. York, seeing the line of charging men coming at him, shot them from the back of the line forward, killing the man at the rear first, then the next, working toward the front, so that the men in front would not see their comrades falling behind them and drop for cover, but would keep coming into his fire until it was too late. It was a technique he knew from hunting a flock of birds or a line of game, where you take the last one first so the others do not scatter. He applied it to a bayonet charge, and he broke it, dropping the entire attacking group before they could reach him. By now, the situation on that hillside had become surreal. One American, with a rifle and a pistol, was systematically destroying the ability of a German unit to fight, killing gunners, breaking a charge, refusing to be dislodged or overwhelmed. And the German officer in charge of the position, having watched this one man cut down his soldiers with impossible precision and seeing no way to stop him, made a decision that must have been agonizing. He offered to surrender. He signaled to York that he and his men would give up. And now the mountain pacifist did the last and strangest thing in this whole strange story. He took the surrender, and then he took charge of the entire enemy position. With his handful of surviving comrades, York gathered up not just the men who had surrendered on the hill, but the prisoners they had taken earlier, and organized the whole enormous crowd of German soldiers into a column. And then, with a pistol, he marched them out, through the forest, back toward the American lines, a long line of German prisoners escorted by a small knot of Americans, with York in command of the whole improbable procession. Along the way, they collected still more Germans, positions that surrendered as this column of their own men came marching through under American guard. When Alvin York finally walked into the American lines and delivered his prisoners, and someone counted them, the number was staggering. He brought in 132 German prisoners, 132, captured in the main by the actions of a single man, a man who, a couple of years earlier, had begged his government to excuse him from the war because his faith forbade him to kill. His patrol, reduced to a handful of men, had silenced the machine guns that were slaughtering the battalion, killed a substantial number of the enemy, and marched over 130 prisoners off the field. The advance that had been pinned down could move again. For this, Corporal Alvin York was awarded the Medal of Honor, and he became, almost overnight, the most famous American soldier of the entire First World War. His story, the mountain pacifist who became the war's greatest hero, captured the imagination of the whole country. He was promoted, decorated by foreign governments as well as his own, paraded, celebrated, and offered, in the years that followed, every opportunity a famous man is offered: money, endorsements, the chance to cash in on his fame in 100 ways. And here, in the aftermath, is where the true measure of Alvin York comes clear, because he turned almost all of it down. York went home to the same poor mountains he had come from, and he was, by all accounts, deeply uncomfortable with the idea of profiting from what he had done. He had killed men in that forest, a great many men, and although he had made his peace with the necessity of it, he did not regard it as something to be celebrated or sold. He refused most of the lucrative offers that came his way, the endorsements and the money-making schemes that would have made him rich. What he wanted instead was to help the people he had come from. He used his fame not to enrich himself, but to try to bring schools and opportunity to the isolated, impoverished mountain communities of Tennessee that had produced him. Communities where children grew up, as he had, with almost no access to education. He poured his energy, and much of what he did accept, into the cause of building schools for mountain children, so that the next generation would have the chances he never had. He lived out his life back in those mountains, farming, working for his community, a devout and humble man to the end. He never really escaped his fame. The country would not let him. But he never used it to make himself comfortable either. The man who had captured an army had gone home to try to build schoolhouses. So what do we take from Alvin York? The surface story is a marksmanship legend, and it is a good one. The mountain hunter whose deadly rifle skill, forged by boyhood necessity, let him do the impossible on a French hillside. And that is true and worth telling. But it misses the thing that actually makes York extraordinary, which is not on the hillside at all. It is in the mountains of Tennessee, in the months before, when a devout man wrestled in genuine anguish with the question of whether he could kill at all, because the easy version of a war hero is a man who wants to fight, a natural warrior who charges toward battle. Alvin York was the opposite of that. He was a man who believed, sincerely and with his whole soul, that killing was a sin, and who did not want to go to war, and who tried to be excused from it. He was not faking his pacifism to avoid danger. His physical courage on that hillside proves that beyond any doubt. He genuinely did not want to kill, and that paradoxically is what makes what he did so powerful. This was not a man to whom killing came easily. This was a man to whom it came only after the deepest possible struggle of conscience, and only once he had convinced himself in prayer and in agonized thought that in this cause and in this moment it was the right and necessary thing to do to save the lives of his friends. There is a lesson in that about the difference between a man who is violent and a man who is capable of violence but does not want to be. The first is common and not especially admirable. The second, the person who could fight, who is genuinely dangerous, but who is restrained by conscience and only acts when conscience itself demands it, is something rarer, and I would argue far better. Alvin York did not kill because he liked it, or because it came naturally. He killed because a hillside of machine guns was slaughtering his friends and there was no one else to stop them, and because he had already done the hard interior work of deciding when a good man is permitted to fight. His pacifism was not erased on that hillside. It was, in a strange way, the thing that made his violence meaningful, because it meant that every shot he fired was fired by a man who understood exactly what it cost and who took no joy in it. And then he went home and gave his fame away to build schools for poor children. He captured 132 men in a morning, and the thing he actually wanted out of life was to make sure the next generation of mountain kids could read. That is the whole man right there. A reluctant warrior who did the impossible when he had to, and then spent the rest of his life trying to do some good with what it had made him. He did not want to be a hero. That may be exactly why he was one. Now I want to hear from you. Had you known the full story of Alvin York, not just the marksmanship on the hill, but the pacifism, the conscientious objector claim he filed, the crisis of conscience he had to fight his way through before he could fire a shot? Tell me in the comments what you make of a man like that. And tell me honestly, does a man who does not want to kill, and who does it only after wrestling with his conscience, deserve more admiration than a natural-born warrior, or less? I read every comment, and I think this one is genuinely worth arguing about. If this story moved you, do me the simple favor of hitting the like button. It truly helps carry these stories to people who have never heard them. And if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe now, because tomorrow we have another remarkable story for you, and I would like you here when we tell it. Thanks for watching.